It was a pretty quiet second day of free agency for the Florida Panthers, but the Panthers used their limited amount of money to add some depth to their lineup. We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, July 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. So today on the show, we are going to discuss the signings of Nate Schmidt and Mackenzie Entwistle to the Florida Panthers. Those are the two moves that the Florida Panthers have made today. The Panthers and their fans will now be changing things of the broadcast experience for the Florida Panthers, as now the Panthers have said goodbye to Bally Sports and have shifted where they will be broadcasting their games, and the 2024-25 schedule has been released. We will discuss that more in segment number 3. And here joining me to discuss all three of these topics here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, it is a Wednesday, which means it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. So Jacob Winans is back, and Jacob, welcome back to the show. And what a week it's been from your last appearance here on the show.
It's been a crazy one. Last time we were talking about celebrating the win, which still doesn't feel real, but reality hit over the weekend. So we had the parade, which was great. And then the very next day, you're seeing signings and guys on the move, and kind of makes you wish the Panthers wrapped it up a little bit sooner so we'd have a little bit more time with these guys to celebrate before having to say goodbye to them. But it's good that they got their last hurrah in the form of that parade. The fans were able to send them off with a big thank you, and in the way of standing in the rain for hours and partying in that crazy storm to celebrate the win. So couldn't have asked for a better send off for those guys. But yeah, it's been a hectic week. A lot of old faces moving on, getting paydays that are well deserved in other places, and a lot of new faces coming in. So there's definitely a lot to talk about. There's not a boring day when it comes to Panthers hockey.
No doubt. And who would have thought that after Matthew Tkachuk and Ryan Lomberg crashed that beer league game in War Memorial, that the very next day you're thinking like that how much different this team is with Ryan Lomberg going back. But we already discussed Ryan Lomberg leaving for Calgary. But one more thing, a few signings that the Panthers have made over on Tuesday, which they signed Mackenzie Entwistle to a 1-year, 2-way deal. Originally a 3rd-round pick from the Arizona Coyotes, never made his debut there, was traded to Chicago, got a little bit of a chance there, and now looking for another opportunity, some AHL depth for the Florida Panthers in their system. But the big one for the Panthers today was signing defenseman Nate Schmidt, and this was a guy that the Panthers had tried trading for in the past, but weren't able to get a deal done to bring him over to the Florida Panthers. But after being bought out by the Winnipeg Jets with 1 year left on his deal, was making just under $6 million a season, was undrafted, came out of the University of Minnesota, where he was coming off a point per game season as a defenseman coming out of there, and brings 76 playoff games under his belt too. He was one of the original misfits of the Vegas Golden Knights back in that expansion draft too. So he has been to a Stanley Cup final in his time in the NHL. So this is like a version of Kevin Stenlund / OEL, a prove it deal, and also a guy who the front office and especially the coaching staff and Paul Maurice in this one is very familiar with having Nate Schmidt when Paul Maurice was in Winnipeg. So We saw it last year with Stenlin being familiar with both Maurice and Zito. OEL, although he was in a different situation with the buyout of Vancouver, this is another opportunity for a prove-it deal for someone like Nate Schmidt, so which, according to Frank Saravelli, took less money to come to the Florida Panthers. So you see how I spoke about yesterday how the guys come in to the Florida Panthers, and even they don't stick around, they get a payday. So what the Panthers and their reputation is for them too. So that's a plus for them. A guy who brings 16 minutes a night, who can get the puck off the ice, a little bit undersized, 32 going on 33, 6'0", 192 pounds, but a guy who can jump into the rush too for the Panthers. So what are you thinking about this signing and for bringing in Nate Schmidt? You see this as maybe like a low risk, high reward situation for him?
Definitely. There was a time where Nate Schmidt was a borderline top pair defenseman, but was a guaranteed lock of a second pair defenseman. Definitely a top four guy. I think he can get back to that level. I think right now I'd consider him a low end number 4 or 5 defenseman, which is really all the Panthers need at this right now in this immediate term. If this is the way the decor stays, assuming the Panthers are in a playoff position by the trade deadline, you would expect that they would add.
Yes.
But the decor as it is right now is good enough to have them in a playoff position by trade deadline time. I don't think there's really too many questions about that. Schmidt can play a two-way game. He can play that shutdown game. He can get the puck up the ice quick. He's a puck mover, an excellent skater. And he has plenty of playoff experience. He was Washington Capital. He was a Vegas Golden Knight. He was with that Golden Knights team that made a run all the way to the Stanley Cup final. He's played big hockey games and he's performed in those moments. So I'm excited to see what he brings. The one thing that sticks out to me about the way the decor is constructed right now is the fact that we only have one right-handed defenseman at the moment. It's Aaron Ekblad. You would think that that's something the Panthers would like to address is getting at least another right-hander in there, someone who can, maybe if they're not a top 4 defenseman on the right-hand side, maybe someone who could fill a bottom pair role on the right side. Just another option that's right-handed, given that Ekblad does have a lot of injury concerns and injury history. If he goes down again, you could see an entire decor of lefties, which not the end of the world. The Panthers did that for a period of time last season. But just something to think about. But one thing with Nate Schmidt, he does play both sides.
Yes.
He can play the left side, the right side. He's lefty, but he does play both sides. He's
just
got
like
a great
Kulikov.
shot from just like Kulikov. He's got a great shot from the point. I don't expect to see him run any power play, but it's something that he's done in the past. He's run a power play 2. He's never been the power play QB for a top unit, but he's run second power play units in some of his previous stops. So I'm excited for him. I think it's not really much of a gamble. The Panthers give him just above league minimum. He's going to come in. He's going to prove it. He's going to play on a discount. And that's exactly what the Panthers need. You get a veteran who's looking for another shot, a guy who's looking to repair his reputation as a player in some regard, just to show that he still has it. And the Panthers are looking for veterans who can play for cheap. It's a win-win.
Yeah, and that's why it makes me also second guess on whether the Panthers are even going to trade Ekblad to begin with, because you would trade a guy to deplete your depth even more, even if it does come at a very high cap hit for the Panthers there. So you question on whether it's going to. And the Panthers, they still have to pay Anton Lundell 5.7 left on their books. So if you maybe 3.5, you only have just under 3 left to get another winger for the Panthers around their lineup too. So that's another thing about the cap situation. But also think about just the life cycles for Stanley Cup contenders and even teams who make it far who don't necessarily win. I mean, paying depth players. I mean, you see the Chernaks, Nick Pauls, Brandon Hagels for the Tampa Bay Lightning, and even guys at the expense of letting Steven Stamkos go. The Kings winning 2 Stanley Cups, letting go of Justin Williams, Tyler Toffoli, Darcy Kemper with the Colorado Avalanche, and then Tampa Bay going back to them, letting Gaudreau, Gord, and Palat go too. And and for Vegas with Aiden Hill and Barbashev, it comes at the expense of losing like a Jonathan Marchessault and Logan Thompson too for them. But in this life cycle for the Panthers, when you see of the guys who are locked up, it's not the depth guys for them. We see an example of someone in New York, like a Pierre Engvall, who has term, even though it's a low cap hit. When you sign guys like a Erod and even a Toulouse-Tourainen, it's not long term, so you're still able to reset some things for the Panthers. And I think Bill Zito is going to be looking to those teams who have gone far so that they can still identified who the top players for them are. But it's you're likely not going to see an overpay of depth players, and from those of the past, maybe it'll show for the Panthers in future years that they're not going to go too crazy with big game hunting in these next, not just this offseason, but maybe even in the trade deadline.
I agree. I think we've seen a couple different results and strategies from Bill Zito, and that's one of the things that makes him such a great GM is the ability to adapt. We've seen him take the huge swings at the trade deadline, the Sherratt, Claude Giroux deals, doesn't work out. Then the next year you see him make no moves at the trade deadline, trust in the group, see what they can do. We saw how that worked out. And this year you see him make moves at the deadline, but they were low cost moves, depth moves. Yes, Tarasenko's a big name, but it wasn't anything like what the Claude Giroux trade was, where he's still at the peak of his career. It was more of a depth move, more just a couple of later round draft picks, and you see how that works out. And that the third strategy tends to be the one that wins out. It's rare you see someone make the giant trade deadline move and end up winning the cup. That for whatever reason, teams continue to do it, but it usually doesn't work out. I mean, you look at Carolina. They make the big moves. They get Gensel, they get Kuznetsov, and they're out in the second round. That just seems to be how it goes sometimes. So we've seen Zito willing to adjust and willing to adapt and know when to take those big swings and know when not to. But yeah, like you said, never overpay for depth. Identify your core, lock in your core, and then almost on a yearly basis, you surround that core with different depth pieces, and eventually it hits. This past season, we saw the result of that. We saw it hit. Kevin Stenlund was a move that got very little recognition, ends up being huge. OEL's a reclamation project. Dmitry Kulikov, Uvis Belinskis. I mean, a bunch of guys that the Panthers signed that weren't really big headline drawers, but it went a long way, and they were all key in the Panthers' run. So lock in the core. We've got that step down. And then you surround them with depth talent on a yearly basis. And you really want to cycle through that and not lock yourself into term and high salary for depth players that are on paper, at least statistically replaceable. That's not to say that the locker room effect doesn't count for anything. The guys who are leaving this year, there was a special bond in that locker room, and it's tough to see them go. But their numbers on at least are somewhat replaceable. So that's the cost of winning. You get guys paid. It's great for them. They leave with a ring, but you have to keep that revolving door to an extent, because you can't lock yourself in while other teams get better. The next year it doesn't get any easier. You have to also adapt and get better, and also have that financial flexibility. So Bill Zito's done a really, really good job of that. And like you said, a lot of the contenders that have fallen into that trap of overpaying for depth on a little bit of recency bias. You see a guy have a great playoff run, and you pay him more than what his career body of work has shown. You end up in a situation similar to what Colorado is dealing with right now. Pretty much capped out. Tampa has had to see players go. Vegas has had to see players go because they've just overpaid for some of those depth guys.
Yeah, and this is once again where you have to rely on the cheap, and once again, guys who brought in low risk, high reward, who actually got extended, who maybe might have a big year for the Panthers. Jonah Gadjevich. So maybe that's another player who, for sure, for the Panthers, who definitely could bring in some of that scoring on the cheap as a guy who scored a lot in the OHL during his time there. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2. We're going to discuss more about the Panthers saying goodbye to Bally Sports and how the TV experience for them is going to look a little different. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time actually go down the closer it gets the first pitch. With last-minute deals, you can save up to 60% buying last minutes for sports, concert, comedy, theater, and more. It's all in pricing. Toggling this feature shows you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. With the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to this Wednesday, July 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Jacob, there is news in relation to the world of the Florida Panthers as far as TV viewing experience for the fan now. And I just want to say, before anyone assumes, this has nothing to do with the Panthers winning the Stanley Cup as far as this move, or very, very little. And this has been something in the works for a while with everything that has gone on with Diamond Sports Group, Bally Sports, and them going bankrupt, and what the direction was going to be. And this was something discussed even on opening day for baseball for the Marlins. But the Panthers were the very first team in South Florida to make a move outside of the RSN, the Regional Sports Network. And the Panthers will now be the third NHL team to be part of this, following the Vegas Golden Knights and the Utah Hockey Club, which Utah was on local TV in Arizona prior to the move too. So nothing new for that club there. But the Panthers will now be on Scripps Sports, which on local TV for the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area will be on Channel 39 in Dade, Broward, and Channel 9 in West Palm Beach. And Fort Myers is TBD. And also the Panthers, it's going to help because for them, you don't have to. It's a lot easier now to get the channels. People who don't want to go to streaming can still get it on their local channels. And also, people who have an antenna, which costs maybe $15, can plug it into their TV and adjust the antenna when necessary. So it is going to be a lot easier to get Panthers hockey. And more importantly, per the Panthers, the broadcast team is not going to change whatsoever. So we're still going to have Goldie, Randy, Katie Engelson, Jeff Chikrin, Ed Jovanowski, Blaylock, and Minervini all there. So, Jacob, your thoughts on this as Scripps Sports and the TV viewing experience in South Florida region, 2.6 million available in 2.6 million homes. So your thoughts, my friend?
I think this is a fantastic win-win move for the entire region. Number one, I think it's obviously huge to keep the broadcast team together. They've kind of built this personality and relationship with South Florida and with the viewers that they're really irreplaceable. They are Panthers hockey. Goldie is honestly, he's a South Florida icon at this point. With his calls, the dude can't leave his house without someone screaming, "Let's go home, baby!" at him. They have such a great reputation with the region, so keeping them is huge. But what excites me about this is just access. The access that this is going to give people who have seen now a winning product for the past couple of years, but it culminates in a Stanley Cup. I honestly, earlier today, I was literally at the movies and I saw several people with Panthers merch, and I made a comment. I was like, I've never seen so many people in public wearing Panthers gear that as much as I've seen in the past couple of weeks. It's just like it was unheard of just a couple of years ago to see so many people supporting this team. So now that you have that local fan support, they've seen a winning product. There's going to be people tuning in next year to watch their first full season of Panthers hockey. And that's super exciting, and that's really, really awesome, and it's going to help the growth of the game. So the access that this is going to give fans in South Florida, and the ability to bring on new fans, because if you think about it, we obviously aren't going to sit here and pretend like we didn't earn a reputation and earn some viewership and fanship through the playoff run. That's a fact. The Panthers fan base grew during the playoffs. Call it what you want. People can say bandwagon all they like. It is what it is. When teams are winning, it gains interest. And we've discussed this many times. Those games were all nationally broadcasted, especially as the run got deeper. These were national broadcast games, TNT, ESPN, ABC. Now those fans who watched on a national broadcast are going to have easy access to watch the local broadcast when they want to tune in next season for their first full season beginning to end of watching Panthers hockey. And I think giving them that ability, without having to do streaming, without having to have ESPN Plus, or without having to have a Bally stream and things like that, it's really, really cool. And it's gonna increase viewership. It's gonna create interest in the sport. It's gonna build the local fan base, and eventually that trickles down to participation. And you're gonna have more kids playing hockey. You're gonna have the region become even more of a hockey hotbed and developmentally. And I think that's the big picture goal. It's more than just Stanley Cups and winning. It's also growing the sport and having a new pipeline of future talent and a new pipeline of future fans. So I'm super pumped about this move.
Yeah, and then the city of Fort Lauderdale also talked about how much the last two playoff runs for the Panthers have boosted the economy. It's looking like $110 million over the last two seasons for the Panthers, and just what they're doing and those numbers alone for them. And now with the amount of merch that's being purchased, I mean, you can't. People are posting pictures of them at Pantherland too, of just how long the line is just to get merch too. So that's another thing. Also with Scripps Network too, is Tim Reynolds also tweeted saying that they might be looking for a Spanish broadcast too. So todo Latino en Miami, Fort Lauderdale, pueden ver el deporte de hockey. So definitely a big opportunity for the Hispanic community also to get so in tune with the sport too, and hopefully maybe a return of Octavio Sequeira too to South Florida.
Make it happen. Make it happen.
Tómalo, please.
And on that topic, real quick before we move on, if anyone who hasn't seen it yet, please try to find the video of Sasha Barkov and Anton Lundell interviewing at the parade, saying "Vamos Gatos" and doing their best to speak Spanish while very clearly intoxicated. It was absolutely hilarious. But I love seeing Barkov and Lundell embracing the culture down here in South Florida. It was super, super cool, but it was very funny. Anton Lundell's got to work on the accent a little bit.
Yeah. So, hey, what matters is that they're trying. That's what matters at the end of the day. So that's and hey, maybe the Telemundo truck will also pull up more to games in South Florida too. Not just NBC6, even though they are basically the same building that they have, and they're the same team for the most part too. So we're going to transition over to segment number 3. We're going to discuss the schedule. Yes, the schedule is out for the 2024-2025 season. Jacob and I are going to break that down, and also our biggest takeaways of the new schedule. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment number 3 here on this Wednesday, July 3rd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday. So, Jacob, I have the schedule is out. The 82 game schedule is here for the Florida Panthers. We knew that opening night was going to be against the Boston Bruins, which I was saying that I thought the Panthers were going to get the early slate, but actually it's going to be the Seattle Kraken getting the early slate on that one. So a little strange for the opening night schedule. So Panthers will be at the middle part of that opening night. But also, I know you said something in our group chat earlier today about how road heavy it is for the Panthers and how you didn't like it. But honestly, man, I said something, I disagreed a little bit with you there about how I actually like the road schedule for the Panthers, of how they're starting at home, but they have they're going to be on the road to mostly start the season. And I think it's a really good way to kick off saying the Stanley Cup champions are in town. And for those home fans of the opposing teams to buy tickets for the defending champions or for them, I think it's great for the Panthers to start off on the road. So any other takeaways for the schedule that you have so far from just looking at first glance?
Yeah, so the road heavy start is definitely one thing. I'd feel a little bit better about the road heavy start if it were against some easier opponents on paper. Now, we don't know what teams are going to be good, what teams are going to be bad. The parity in the NHL is second
volatile.
to none. So it's tough to predict who's going to be good. But on paper, at least, there's some tough teams in that early slate on the road. But it is an opportunity. The Panthers have been a really good road team a couple of years in a row now. Starting on the road gives them the opportunity to continue that. And also, anytime you see early road heavy, that means late home heavy. You would love to have home games in your building later in the season when it gets more crucial to get some of those points. So you'll take that all day. So that's one thing as far as the schedule that I look at is that road heavy start. Not the worst thing in the world. Also, being on the road so much gives a team a really good opportunity to bond and get to know each other. And players talk about that all the time. They're closer on the road than they are at home because you're just with your teammates and you're exploring the city. You're getting meals together. You're on the plane talking to new guys, and that's good for a team that has so many new faces. So I'll take that as a positive. I love the NHL's direction with a lot of these home and home matchups.
Oh yeah, 5 of them for the Panthers.
Yep,
not including the global series.
Correct. Yep. So a lot of these home and home matchups, and then there were a couple in there. I think 1, maybe 2 that weren't home and home, but it was 2 games in a row at home against the same team.
Winnipeg and Anaheim.
Correct. I like that too. I'm a fan of that, having back-to-backs against the same team and homes. I think it gives a little bit of that MLB style feel where you have a series. You don't just play a one-off game. It's a 2-game series for AL versus NL usually, and then you've got the 3-game and 4-game series that you play. I like that. It helps create rivalry, but it also tends to make those second games a lot more interesting. Having just played against the team and having to see them again, guys don't like each other. That's 120 minutes of being in each other's face. Creates familiarity with the style. So if you see a team one day and then you play them again the next day, it gives you a little bit of taste of almost playoff hockey. I think that's good for the Panthers. It's good to have to get used to that, seeing the same team a couple times in a row. So I love that. I think the NHL should really do more of that. Cuts down on some of the unnecessary travel as well. Just some of the back and forth and long road trips. If you can get a home and home out of the way, it clears one of those road flights and also eliminates the advantage because if both teams are traveling, you're not coming into a building tired when a team has been at home. So those are the 2 things I take away the most are the home and homes, the road heavy schedule to start. And I'm excited. There's just going to be a lot of meaningful games. Having some of these games at home, there's dates that we're circling on the calendar when Edmonton comes to town, opening the season against Boston, the Finland games. There's a lot to be excited about where the Panthers are concerned. And every game you're going to get everybody's best because you're the Stanley Cup champs and there's no bigger target on your back. And I think it's something the Panthers haven't had before. So it should be fun.
Yeah. And they have their typical patterns when it comes to the schedule of having the New York Rangers and the Montreal Canadiens in December at home too. Not only Winnipeg and Anaheim on home and home too, but also the Montreal Canadiens in another situation too for them. Their only matinees that are not on the weekends are on Columbus Day against the Boston Bruins on the road and on Black Friday against the Carolina Hurricanes, which they also have a home and home back-to-back in that same weekend on that Saturday too. So a little bit of a different in the schedule. Also, there's one strange road trip for the Panthers in early January where they have a few days off. They only go to Colorado and Utah and then back for one home game, and they'll go back on the road too. So that's a little bit of a strange in the schedule. And also, the Midwest games are always strange because they combine Minnesota as part of a Western Canadian trip. They put Chicago and Winnipeg together in one trip, but then they separate St. Louis in a different road trip to Washington and St. Louis in one. I mean, they did Dallas and Carolina in one road trip last year. So that all those central games for one trip are always split up they always have at least one East Coast game in the middle of that to at least still hit all the cities in one, to at least, I mean, with venue availability, it's always difficult especially with a lot of these who share with basketball too. But you mentioned rematch against the Edmonton Oilers, on the first one being on the 16th of December, which also is Monday Night Prime in Canada too. That's a new nationally televised package for in north of the border. And also the Edmonton Oilers will be here on the 27th of February against the Florida Panthers too. Also, their California trip is in January. Their Western Canadian trip is in December too. We mentioned the home and homes too. And yeah, 5 of them back-to-back games against another team, which does not include which also 6 if you include the Global Series. And also, here's one thing too for the Panthers is the TNT schedule. The TNT nationally televised schedule has not been released yet. But when you start to look at the patterns of the Wednesday games, which Wednesday is usually an off night in the NHL, mostly save for the nationally televised rivalry nights, which, well, with the exception of the night before Thanksgiving where everyone plays on Wednesday, Panthers have 6 games slated on a Wednesday this year too. So that's also big for the exposure of the Florida Panthers too there. No President's Day nor MLK Day game because 4 Nations will be a thing during President's Day too. And also game 82 is against Tampa Bay. So that game will mean something. And also last non-East Coast game is on February 25th against the Nashville Predators. So the one that sticks out, what I just named just now, is the Wednesday games for the Panthers that we mentioned. They're going to get exposure with being the Stanley Cup champions. They are the hunted now for sure. And even they were even the hunted even last season when they made it to the Cup final and you saw it with the amount of nationally televised games they had then. So what else sticks out with what I just mentioned?
Yeah, I love that the Panthers are going to get some nationally televised games. Again, we're talking about growing the game locally. The Panthers are also a super marketable team now, with Matthew Tkachuk really at the forefront of that. They're an exciting team to watch, and national hockey media has started to catch on. Also, national media broadcast teams love to call Panthers games because the time they get to spend in South Florida, especially during parts of the year that are extremely freezing cold and not as enjoyable to be in some other locations. You hear it all the time. Broadcast teams love getting to come to Florida and call a game. So that's good for them, but it's also great for the Panthers getting that national attention. You can't keep a Stanley Cup champion off TV. They're going to get those national games, and it's another cool thing that we've seen sort of develop with this team. It used to be a time where the Panthers would get maybe 1 or 2 national games a year, and it would just be the throwaway late night game against a San Jose or against an Anaheim just to meet the minimum and put them on national TV once or twice a year when not many people are watching. But that has changed. The Panthers are must-see TV. Really going back to their first ever playoff series against Tampa, being the most exciting hockey of that entire playoff run. People love to have their eyes on the Panthers. It's the style they play. It's the way that their games always seem to have some fireworks, whether it's high scoring or physical or nasty, and a lot of the heavyweight fights and stuff like that. It seems to always happen in the Panthers game. The entire total of all players on the ice getting ejected. That's a Panthers game. We've seen so many things that draw attention, draw eyes. It's super exciting to see the Panthers finally get that attention. I'm pumped to see them on national TV more and more.
Yeah, and I'm sure with how marketable they are, a lot of neutral fans are excited to see them. Also, a few other notes for them is the Frozen Frenzy is going to be returning on October
Can't wait.
22nd. The Panthers will be on the second slot, so we will be having an early night that night, because I remember last year the Philadelphia Flyers had an 11 p.m. game at the Vegas Golden Knights. I'm like, oh. So good for the Panthers and having that light of a schedule in the early part. Also, the fellow returns of former Panthers players, with Brandon Montour returning on February 22nd when the Panthers welcome in the Kraken. Toronto will be coming to town on November 27th, where OEL and Stoli will be returning. Calgary will be coming to town on March 1st, where Ryan Lomberg will be making his return, and the Utah Hockey Club will be coming to town on March 28th, where Kevin Stenlund will be coming back. And those are the games I also can't wait to welcome back the guys.
Yep. And one thing about those is, aside from Toronto, most of the players who departed the Panthers after this season went out west, meaning there will only be one time this year that they visit Emirates Bank Arena. So it's you assume they'll get their rings those nights, and the tribute video should be pretty special, and the building's going to be really loud to welcome those guys back, because as we've talked about, when you win a cup with your team, you're forever a part of that team, and you're forever a part of the region. So it'll be really cool to welcome those guys back. I can't wait for some of those.
And the fact that we have multiple nights, almost a handful, and to think that we still don't have news of Tarasenko, Cousins, Stephen Lawrence, so we still don't even know. We don't know any of those yet. So we could have as much of maybe even a handful of those special nights come next season. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, discussing the schedule, Panthers moving away from Bally Sports, and the signing of Nate Schmidt. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me online on X at Jacob Winans 8. And yeah, we'll be talking Panthers hockey really the rest of the summer.
Awesome. Can't wait to talk to you more this summer, and I will see you next week, my friend.
Can't wait.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.